Grandmother Maria lived in a small provincial town. She was known for her kindness and caring for her neighbors. No one could have guessed that she had lost her mind. One morning, the neighbors noticed that Maria began to behave strangely. She often talked to herself and forgot about her duties. They soon found out that Maria had started visiting an abandoned hospital that was not far from her home. Grandma Maria was always a good-natured woman who took care of her neighbors. Everyone in the small provincial town loved her. But one day, everything changed. Maria began to behave strangely, talking to herself and forgetting about her duty. No one knew exactly what happened, but rumors began to spread when she was seen near an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of the city. The abandoned hospital was a place that all residents avoided. It was built in the pre-war years, but closed due to many tragic cases and unexplained death. People said that its walls were haunted by the ghosts of those who died in agony. Places steeped in dark history and a dark energy that repelled everyone except Maria. At first, her visits were rare, but over time, they became more frequent and prolonged. Maria returned home late at night. Her eyes were empty, and her behavior was becoming more and more strange. She started bringing home old medical instruments, rusty and covered in dust, and locked herself in her room with them for long hours. The neighbors began to worry. One evening, several of them decided to talk to her, find out what was going on. They knocked on her door, and Maria invited them in. Her house was in chaos. Old photographs of the hospital, medical records hung on the walls, and an old surgical table stood in the corner of the room. "What's going on, Maria?" one of the neighbors asked, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Maria turned to them, her eyes burning with a mad glare. "I found a way to help all of you," she said, her voice low but confident. "The hospital opened my eyes. I realized that I could cure people of their suffering." The neighbors retreated, feeling a growing fear. But Maria kept talking, her words becoming more incoherent and frightening. She talked about rituals and sacrifices, about spirits that require worship. Her speeches became more and more delusional, and the neighbors hurried away, promising themselves not to return. But the next day, when one of the neighbors, a young woman named Anna, did not come to work, people began to worry. She wasn't at home, and no one had seen her since last night. Her friends started searching, but Anna seemed to disappear into thin air. A few days passed, and residents began to notice that people began to disappear in the city. At first, these were isolated cases, but then the disappearances began to occur more often. People began to suspect that Maria was connected with this. They decided that they needed to stop her somehow. They were afraid to approach her house. One evening, a few brave souls decided to go to an abandoned hospital. They believed that they would find answers there. Inside the hospital, darkness and silence reigned, broken only by their footsteps and the rustle of rats. They walked through long corridors, past empty wards and operating rooms, until they reached the basement. They found a creepy scene in the basement. The walls were covered with strange symbols written in blood, and in the center of the room there was an altar on which Anna lay. Her eyes were open, but she didn't react to their presence. Maria was standing next to the altar, her hands covered in blood, and she was muttering incomprehensible words. "You shouldn't be here," Maria said, her voice cold and empty. "I'm just getting started. These rituals, they will bring eternal life." The brave men tried to take Anna away, but Maria attacked them with unexpected force. Her eyes burned with a mad fire, and she began to scream, calling on the spirits of the hospital. Suddenly, the lights went out, and the room was filled with unbearable darkness. When the light returned, Maria was gone. Anna was lying on the altar. Her body was cold and motionless. The brave men, terrified, hurried to leave the hospital, taking Anna's body with them. Brave men, returning to the city, told everyone about the terrible find and Maria's strange behavior. The city was plunged into fear and confusion. People began to lock their houses, afraid of night walk. However, the disappearances continued, and it soon became clear that Maria was returning to continue her rituals. Every night, she wandered the streets, choosing new victims. People said they heard whispers outside the windows and saw her shadow wandering in the moonlight. Maria was no longer the kind grandmother that everyone knew and loved. Now she was just a shadow, gripped by madness and darkness. One of the next victims was a married couple who lived near an abandoned hospital. One night, they woke up to a strange noise in their house. The father of the family, taking a lantern, went down to the first floor to find out what was going on. His wife stayed in the bedroom, hugging her son and praying that everything would end well. But Maria was waiting for him downstairs. Her eyes sparkled in the dark, and she slowly approached the man, uttering incomprehensible spells. Paralyzed by fear, he couldn't even scream when she grabbed him and led him away. The wife, hearing strange noises, ran to the window and saw her husband being led away towards an abandoned hospital. The next day, neighbors found a woman and her son dead in their house. Their faces were distorted with horror, and the same strange symbols were painted on the walls of the bedroom as in the basement of the hospital. The city went into a panic. People began to leave their homes and move to other cities, leaving Maria empty streets and houses. However, every night, when the city was plunged into silence and darkness, Maria returned. She roamed the streets, bringing fear and terror to the hearts of the inhabitants. Now her rituals were becoming even more violent and bloody. She performed her vile rituals on those she managed to fuck, sacrificing them to her dark forces. Alexei, realizing that time was working against him, decided to act. He disappeared into the shadows, watching Maria and trying to understand her habits. One night, he saw her sacrifice a young girl who was one of the last to risk staying in the city. Alexei knew he had to stop it, prepared for the decisive battle. The next night, when Maria reappeared, he went out to meet her. In his hands was a dagger, which he found in one of the closed drawers of the hospital. The dagger was decorated with strange symbols and looked older than the hospital itself. Maria smiled when she saw him. "Are you the last one?" she asked, her voice now sounding like the echo of 1,000 souls. "You're not gonna stop me. You will bring me more strength." Alexei silently approached. He knew this was his last chance. He carried his dagger, filled with determination and despair. In a last act of desperate resistance, he attacked Maria, trying to pierce her heart. But Maria was too strong. She grabbed his arm, her eyes blazing with a mad fire. She was laughing as if she knew this was going to happen. "You are my last gift," she whispered, and an inhuman joy flashed in her eyes. Alexei felt his strength leaving his body. He was weaker than ever. Maria began to utter incomprehensible words, trapping his soul in dark fetters. He tried to resist, but her strength was too great.